Splinter of the Mind's Eye by Alan Dean Foster, a sequel to Star Wars, which thankfully did not end up being the sequel to Star Wars. So picture this: the year is 1977, and a little film called Star Wars is coming to theaters. But although it may be hard to believe now, at the time, no one really knew whether it was going to be a success or not. And so the man behind the movie, George Lucas himself, had to have a backup plan. So the science fiction author Alan Dean Foster was contracted to pen a sequel to Star Wars, and a much smaller scale sequel to Star Wars at that. So, on the off chance that the film ended up being a financial disappointment and would not have merited getting a full theatrical sequel, the plan, I believe, was to adapt this book to some kind of low budget television film or something like that. So this was the plan B for Star Wars. But as we all know, the film ended up being a runaway success, and the cinematic sequel we did end up getting to Star Wars was the much more grandiose and possibly just like the most iconic film of all time, The Empire Strikes Back. So, what actually is the story of Splinter of the Mind's Eye? And don't ask me what the hell the title of the book actually means, because I don't know. It's never explained in the book what Splinter of the Mind's Eye actually means. This sounds like some kind of dope as hell metal album. This sounds like something that Cynic or Edge of Sanity would have made. If you told me this was not a novel but rather an album by one of those bands, I could totally believe it, because the title is actually cooler than the actual story is. But anyway, I don't know what the hell Splinter of the Mind's Eye actually means. But anyway, so sometime after the events of Star Wars, Luke and Leia are en route to a conference on some planet to try to convince the residents of this planet or star system at large to join the rebellion and fight back against the Empire. But wouldn't you know it, they crash land on this swamp jungle planet named Mimban. And then they find that the Empire has mining operations going on there. Then they meet this old woman named Hala, who tells them about this crystal called the Kyber crystal. And this is actually a term which would go on to have greater significance in the Star Wars lore, I believe, even though it's spelled differently than it is in this book. But anyway, so this crystal, this MacGuffin, if you will, heightens force sensitivity, right? So she's like, we got to get this crystal. And then Luke and Leia are like, okay, but then they get thrown in jail because disorderly conduct. They meet some alien werewolf-like things. Then they bust out of jail. They go after the crystal. They're being pursued by agents of the Empire, led by one Captain Grammel, and eventually Darth Vader himself shows up. Luke and him throw down. Darth Vader falls down a hole. They get the crystal, and then that's the book. That is Splinter of the Mind's Eye. It is not a long book. It's right at 200 pages in this edition. But anyway, so that is the story. So let's talk about the technical qualities of the story, and then let's talk about how this story compares with, the Star Wars franchise more broadly, because this is kind of an odd book that exists kind of on the fringes of the franchise. Anyway, so the writing in the book is competent. Alan Dean Foster was a decent writer, and on a prose level, I don't really have much to complain about. The sentences are competently worded. Uh, in fact, he actually uses some interesting turns of phrase in this book, which I kind of wasn't really expecting for just kind of a pulp sci-fi novel. But hey, I'm not gonna uh, sneer at that. So yeah, the prose, it's not gonna blow you away, but it's not really bad. And like I say, there are some interesting choices of words and phraseology in here at times, which again I kind of wasn't expecting. So I'm good with it on the writing level. Now, as to the characters, this is a major weakness because there is precious little depth to any of these characters in here. This is basically just like a pulp novel uh, set in the Star Wars universe. It does not really go in for like psychological depth or character development. Luke and Leia are the good guys. Grammel and Darth Vader are the bad guys. That's pretty much all there is to it. Not much depth to this. The characters are flat as hell. But you know, um, that perhaps was to be expected. Now, as to the actual story of this, I found it. While it's nowhere near the level of like The Empire Strikes Back, I did find this engaging enough to keep me turning the pages. It was a fun, very small scale by Star Wars standards story, which nonetheless was plotted decently and flowed nicely, and which I was actually invested in until the ending, and then it kind of went to shit at the ending at the end. But overall, it was you know it was well done enough up to a point anyway on the level of like the actual story. Yeah, now that we've talked about the technical qualities of it, let's talk about like what most viewers are probably really wanting to know, like how does this measure up against the other stories in the Star Wars canon? And this is again kind of an odd book because it's definitely on the fringes. Now I want to say Alan Dean Foster should not be blamed for any shortcomings really with this book as regards the story, because he was kind of given the impossible task of penning a sequel to a film that ended up being wildly successful, one of the most iconic and influential films of all time. And then he was tasked with making that sequel go in a completely different direction, because this does not really feel like a Star Wars story, because like Star Wars is space opera, right? What you expect is like spectacular interstellar dogfights and like just like really quotable dialogue and epic, battles and duels and stuff. Lots of like very like capital R romantic storytelling, and this is a very, 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 very small scale story that takes place pretty much on one planet, which is in the environs are pretty much just swamp and jungle. Not much diversity as regards location, and the cast is very, very small as well. But again, you can't really hold that against Alan Dean Foster because he was kind of just doing the best with what he had to work with. Uh, but this book also is characterized by the fact that at this point in the Star Wars game, the lore, like the relationships between these characters, were not really fleshed out as they would be, and so this is kind of like an alternate sequel to the original Star Wars, and it 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 really is not. You can't. I don't think you can actually like make a case that this fits in the actual main canon. Like, I suppose you could kind of a case could be made that this maybe could like take place between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back, but I don't really think it does. I think this has to be regarded as some kind of like alternate what if scenario. Again, this is definitely out there on the fringes of the Star Wars franchise. But one thing that you're going to notice right up front is that Luke and Leia are like into each other. Like this, like given the fact that they eventually were revealed to be siblings, this is like some sweet home Tatooine stuff right here. This is like heavily incestuous if you like still regard them when reading this book as siblings, because Luke is crushing on Leia like hard in this book. It's definitely a romantic vibe between them, like hardcore. There is no hint that she has any kind of feelings for Han Solo, because Han Solo does not appear in this book. It's funny because Harrison Ford was not contracted for uh, any sequels to Star Wars at the time that this was written, so they couldn't include that character because he might not have been willing to show back up. So Han is like mentioned like once or twice in this, but so it's definitely just Luke and Leia all the way. They are really into each other, and again, it feels kind of jarring given the fact that, like, as we now know, officially they are siblings, right? And that's why I say if you want to make the case that this takes place like between Star Wars or A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back, it's weird. If you want to make that case, like it feels weird just how into each other they are. But anyway, also Darth Vader shows up in at the very end of this, and like he appears on the cover here, so like you would think he would be like a major presence in the story. He's not. He shows up at the tail end of the book, and he is not the same character as he was in the film. Like he does not feel the same. At least he is way more verbose than he is in the movies. Uh, and his dialogue is much more some kind of like mustache twirling Saturday morning cartoon villain rather than the kind of taciturn, very direct villain that he is in the films, who doesn't really mince words. It feels like a totally different characterization. And also, although I said that Alan Dean Foster has to be excused for a lot of the inconsistencies within this book in relation to the Star Wars franchise at large. Some of them he really can't be, because this is not consistent even with the events of the film Star Wars, which was in existence, in which um, Alan Dean Foster had to work with at the time this was written. Like, uh, first of all, why is Darth Vader's lightsaber blue in this? Like, what? Like, that's like the simplest thing, is that the Sith lightsabers are red and the Jedi lightsabers are green and blue. That's just like the simplest thing. Why is Darth Vader's lightsaber blue in this when it was red in the film? And also, beyond just that, at the end of the book, Darth Vader mentions to Luke, he says, it took me forever to find out that you were the one who shot me my ship, and at the end of Star Wars at the big battle of the Death Star thing. But it wasn't. That was Han that shot Darth Vader at the end of the film. So like it's not even consistent with the film. It's kind of broken in some ways. Also, Luke cuts off Darth Vader's arm at the end of this, and it says there was less blood than he had imagined. Well, there shouldn't be any blood, given that Darth Vader is like a cyborg who is mostly machine. That does not fit with um, the canon, that Darth Vader's arm would be real. So it's flawed as regards its consistency with the broader franchise. But I do want to say this though, because this is very interesting. So at the end of the book, when they're making it to the mysterious like alien temple thing, where they're going to find the crystal, they find the crystal, and the crystal is embedded in this statue thing. And I would like to read the description that the book gives, because it's very, very interesting. A colossal statue was seated there against the dark wall. It represented a vaguely humanoid being seated on a carved throne. Leathery wings, which might have been vestigial, swept out in two awesome arcs to either side of the figure. Enormous claws thrust from feet and arms, the latter clinging to the ends of armrests on the throne. It had no face below slanted, accusing eyes, only a mass of Medusian carved tentacles. You heard it here first. It is official that Star Wars and Cthulhu uh, occupy the same universe. It is official that Star Wars crosses over with the works of H.P. Lovecraft. So even though this book is contradictory in many ways with the later established lore of Star Wars, even though it's not the most impressive work of literature, it did serve to make it official once again that Star Wars and Cthulhu occupy the same universe. So it deserves points for that at least. But I would like to say this for the book as well. I came across this book in a Goodwill, as you can probably see by the sticker here. I found this book in a Goodwill, and I was familiar with it. Like, I knew what it was, so I was like, I'm going to read that. But I did not realize at the time that I bought this book that this is apparently not a reprint, but like a first in like a first edition mass market paperback from, I guess, 1978. I think is when the book was published. And I gotta say, it is. It's not in great condition. It's not mint, but it is in decent condition. Like, none of the pages are loose. The spine isn't broken. It's perfectly readable. And when I realized that, I was like, oh, this might be some kind of like collector's item. But I would also like to point out something regarding the book. Here on the front, at the very top of the book, it says Ballantine, $1.95. That is how much this book cost when it first came out, all the way back in, I think, again, 1978. But what I paid for it at the Goodwill where I got it here on this sticker, $1.99. It cost me 4 cents more to buy this book, uh, being almost 50 years old, than it did when the book came out. You can probably do some like inflationary calculations there to determine the degradation of the U.S. dollar between 1978 and 2025. You know, the Fed just hard at work. But that just kind of struck me as humorous of the kind of the the price of this book versus then versus now. But also not just the price. In the back of this book, it says it has this little ad here. It says, "Remember, it doesn't grow on trees. Energy conservation. It's your chance to save America." From the Department of Energy in Washington D.C. It's wanting you to like conserve oil because it has pictures like oil and stuff. I guess I can't show it, but and I guess that's pertaining to like the oil shortages of the 1970s, I suppose. Just this book is just a blast from the past. It really is. But anyway, that doesn't really pertain to like the overall story or the quality of it. Is just kind of just in interesting aside that I found worthy of note after I had purchased this book. But anyway, so Splinter of the Mind's Eye by Alan Dean Foster. What would I rate this book? Well, it ain't great, and it pales in comparison to The Empire Strikes Back. So, like I said, thankfully, even though this book was a sequel to Star Wars, it did not end up being the sequel to Star Wars. Although I have to say, even though it pales in comparison to The Empire Strikes Back, it is still leaps and bounds. It is still light years better than the absolute horseshit of the Disney Star Wars films. You know, screw those films. Those are wall-to-wall shit, almost without exception. But this book outshines those films of Disney's at least. So I'm gonna give it credit for that. But to rate this book, I think I would give it just an even C, just right down the middle. Just an even C. The writing is okay. The characters are very flat, but the story is actually it's fun. It's fast paced. It's engaging, even though I think it kind of craps out at the end because it has some truly cringy dialogue towards the end. And also some of the actions of the characters, I don't think Leo could go toe to toe with Darth Vader with a lightsaber. Actually, I don't think Luke could go toe to toe with a lightsaber with Darth Vader at this point in his character arc. So yeah, the ending kind of dropped it down for me. But overall, for what it is, it's an enjoyable read. And while it's far from the best thing in the Star Wars universe, it's far from the worst as well. So yeah, it's just getting an even C for me. Now, have you read Splinter of the Mind's Eye? If you have, let me know down in the comments what you thought of the book, whether you have agreed or disagreed with anything I've said here today. And if you haven't read Splinter of the Mind's Eye, if you're like a true, like hardcore Star Wars fan out there, you might want to pick this up because it is an oddity. It is unique as in the overall Star Wars franchise. It is kind of a thing unto itself with underneath that umbrella. And it's not the worst thing in the franchise by a long shot. So it might be worth reading. But as always, if you have enjoyed anything you've seen or heard here today, remember to hit that like button and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. And until next time, peace.